Okay, so these are the notes for Unit 4. In this video, we're going to be covering the first sort of section here, which is nationalism and this new American culture. So Unit 4 is pretty long. So it's 6 sections. We'll cover pretty much the whole first one here in this little bit. So you see the name of the unit is Forging an American Identity, and that's sort of the theme throughout this entire unit. We're going to see our American culture start to emerge. We're going to see the landscape of our country change, the size of our country change, ultimately leading up to a very interesting type of landscape and diversity, a very large range of diversity all over our country. So right after the War of 1812, when we talked about this new feeling of nationalism that's all over the country, people are feeling really positive about being an American, and people are feeling, very unified from winning the War of 1812. So we're going to start to see an American culture actually start to emerge. Now, before this, we were essentially a carbon copy of Great Britain. We spoke the same type of language. Not only do we speak English, but we spoke it the same way. We wore the same clothes, read the same books, we had the same traditions. But really starting in the early 1800s, we're going to start to see Americans developing their own culture. So this guy here on the left, his name is Alexis de Tocqueville. Alexis de Tocqueville came to the United States expecting to see what everybody else had seen, this copy of Great Britain. But what he saw was very different, and he got here right in time to really see this new American culture starting to emerge. So he began to sort of study how people were interacting with one another, and what he came up with was a book that he wrote called Democracy in America. And in Democracy in America, he talks about a lot of things. Obviously, he talks about how our government works. But really the main theme of the book is essentially that all Americans see progress and change as extremely important, and that we always are in need of improvement. We should always be working to make sure our country is a better place. So that goes into not just imitating European cultures. We're not just doing what they're doing now. We're trying to do what they do, but we're trying to make it better. So that's going to translate into our art, literature, fashion, music, really everything. So let's talk about art. So here on the right, we've got this guy, Thomas Cole. Thomas Cole is going to be the founder of the Hudson River School. The Hudson River School is an art school and an art movement that starts in 1825. And you can see there's 2 pictures here. We'll flip through some more. So Hudson River School art, like this one, if you look at this picture, it's all landscapes. It's really sort of celebrating the beauty of the American countryside and how our country looks. You see the deer that's down here in the bottom of this picture. They're very minimal. This painting is not of these deer. This painting is of these mountains and these incredible cliffs and the waterfalls. This painting, there's this guy down here on a horse and a tiny little house. That's not what the painting is of. This guy is not the subject of the painting. The subject of the painting is this incredible mountain and these rolling hills. These are the true stars of the show here. All of these people are very minimal. You're really looking at the entire beauty of the whole countryside here. So that's really what this is, the Hudson River School movement of art. So we're also going to see some authors who are going to come onto the scene and actually be able to compete with British authors. Before this point, really British and European authors were the ones that were selling books globally. We didn't have any Americans who were really going to be successful in terms of selling books or becoming widely known around the world. But here at this point, we're going to start to see some authors who do this. So here's 4 that you should know. The first here on the right, not on the right, on the left, is Washington Irving. Washington Irving wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, if you remember that, the Headless Horseman. So that's essentially about this guy who falls in love with a girl, and this other guy tries to come and steal her away, so he makes up this story about this headless horseman to freak him out, essentially. He also wrote, Washington Irving also wrote the Rip Van Winkle story, if you remember that, about the guy who gets drunk and passes out for 100 years, wakes up, his wife is dead, and he's like, Hallelujah, this is great. So that's Washington Irving. The next guy, James Fenimore Cooper, he wrote The Last of the Mohicans, which is an excellent book and also a really great movie. If you haven't watched it, it is on your movie list for this unit. If it's not typed on there, then you can, I'm giving you now verbal permission to watch it. The next is William Cullen Bryant. William Cullen Bryant was actually a poet. This book that I have here in front of him, in front of his picture, is a collection of poetry from him called Thanatopsis. He's going to be a really famous American poet. And then here, finally on the right, we've got Noah Webster. His name should ring a bell. He is the author of An American Dictionary of the English Language. So the reason why this isn't the first English dictionary, but this is the first dictionary that incorporates thousands of words that were only used in the United States, words that had never been in a dictionary anywhere before. So nationalism is really what is, driving all of this. Nationalism is the belief that the interests of the nation as a whole are more important than the regional interests or the regions of other, or the interests of other countries. So essentially, if there's a problem facing the country, you would see that as our most important thing that we have to address right now, as opposed to a problem that is facing your county, city, or state. So the opposite of nationalism is sectionalism. That's what we're going to see happening when we get to the Civil War, when people start identifying more with their state or their region being the South or the North versus the whole country. So these feelings are sweeping all across the country, and it's really unifying. We've got a lot of cultural unity, and nationalism it comes with it a lot of different cultural beliefs that we can talk about, which is essentially civic nationalism, a bunch of different values and ideas that we all as a country tend to believe in, things like freedom and tolerance, equality, individual rights, stuff like that. So while this is sort of seeping its way into everyone's mind and blood all across the country, it's eventually going to get into our government, right? So we're going to see nationalism impact every branch of government. So let's talk about the judicial branch first. So this guy right here is Chief Justice John Marshall. He's the longest serving Chief Justice ever in history. So he served from 1801 to 1835, and he very much believed in a strong national government. So in a lot of his cases, a lot of the landmark cases that he was a ruling judge in, you see him side with the national government, or side with whatever plaintiff or defendant would benefit the national government or the nation in general more. So we've got two cases here we'll talk about. The first one, McCulloch v. Maryland. So McCulloch v. Maryland happened in 1819. And it involved the National Bank. So we've talked about the National Bank before, and we know that many states were unhappy with the idea of having a national bank because it sort of created a little competition with their own state banks. So Maryland was essentially just being petty, and they decided to place a tax on the branch of the National Bank that was in Maryland. It was in Baltimore. There was it's not just one bank in D.C. They've got branches all over the country. So they had a branch of the bank in Baltimore, and Maryland placed a tax on it. That's kind of crazy, having a state tax the federal government. It's very backwards. So a guy, James McCulloch, refused to pay this tax, and he sued the state of Maryland. So we see here the state interests being Maryland versus national interests being James McCulloch. Who do you think John Marshall's going to side with? He's going to side with James McCulloch. So he basically says that national interests are to be put above state interests, and it is not constitutional for a state to tax a federal organization or entity. So he rules with James McCulloch there. The second case is Gibbons v. Ogden, and this involves two guys arguing over steamboat business. So Aaron Ogden was a guy who wanted to have a steamboat business in the state of New York. He wanted to be the official steamboat business of New York. And he got a permit, a license from New York State saying that he was the official steamboat guy. Well, Thomas Gibbons also wanted to do that. So he went to the federal government and got a license that said he was the official steamboat guy of the state of New York. Now, the question is, whose, license is more legitimate here? Is it Gibbons, who has his license from the federal government, or is it Ogden, who got his license first? So who is John Marshall going to rule with? He's going to rule with Gibbons. He's going to rule with Thomas Gibbons here, saying that the national government is obviously national law set above state law, and only the national government has the right to regulate interstate commerce. That's in the Constitution, so the state of New York doesn't have the right to do that, so he ends up giving the license to Thomas Gibbons. So we talked about Henry Clay before, so we're going to see here how nationalism is impacting our legislative branch. So Henry Clay is our secretary. He's the Speaker of the House, so he's the head of the House of Representatives. And he devises this plan. It's essentially a series of bills that he wants to pass in Congress that is going to unify our country. And it's called the American System. So it was several different policies, 3 of which that you need to know. So the first policy is a tariff to protect American industries. We talked about a tariff before, right? Passing a tariff encourages people to buy in country. If you need some reminder on what a tariff is, look that up. Number 2, we want to sell off government lands to increase government revenue. So instead of increasing taxes, we can just start selling all of this land that we have out in Louisiana and these places and get people to start using it, which will help us to make some money on top of the fact that it will put all of that land to good use. And then number 3, the government will then use that money to fund internal improvements. What I mean by internal improvements is infrastructure, right? Roads, bridges, canals, things that help our country as a whole work with one another. So then we've got the executive branch. So in 1816, James Monroe is going to be elected president. So he's our 5th president now. We've been through Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison, and now here we're at Monroe, number 5. And Monroe's presidency is known as the Era of Good Feelings. Got that name. A Boston newspaper actually called it that. And there's 2 reasons for that. Number 1 is all of that nationalism, right? We're feeling great. That's obviously good vibes. It makes sense that we would want to call this an era of good vibes. Everybody's feeling good about being American. Everybody's loving each other, loving our new American culture. Reason number 2 is a booming economy. Okay, we mentioned before that an effect of the War of 1812 was an increase in manufacturing. When you combine that with this new protective tariff that Henry Clay's been working on, we're really going to see our economy start to take a big uptick, and things are going to be looking really good for us financially speaking. So we're actually going to see the shape of the United States change a lot during this unit. This is when we're finally going to see the United States look like what it looks like today. So there's a couple of things we need to talk about. James Monroe's Secretary of State, the person who runs, foreign relations, is going to be John Quincy Adams. You see him pictured there. He's John Adams' son. And James Monroe is going to take a tip, essentially, from Thomas Jefferson, and he's going to start working on changing the shape of the United States. You remember Thomas Jefferson did that with the Louisiana Purchase. He set that precedent. So now James Monroe can start doing the same thing. So he has his Secretary of State get on this. So in 1818, John Quincy Adams signs the Rush-Bagot Treaty with Great Britain. And the Rush-Bagot Treaty essentially marks right this line. You see how our border here is all jagged and crazy around all these lakes and stuff, and then it's just a straight line right here. Well, that's because that's how we did that on purpose. We signed this Rush-Bagot Treaty with Great Britain, basically saying that this line, the 49th parallel, would be our border between the United States and Canada on the western side. When we did that, we actually got a new little piece of land. This little green piece right here, when we drew this line straight, we got this new piece of land, which is pretty cool. Not super impressive, but we'll take what we can get. The next year, he signs the Adams-Onis Treaty. The Adams-Onis Treaty he signs with Spain, and in this treaty is when we get control of Florida. So now we own Florida. So all of this is ours, all of this is ours, all of this is ours, all of this red is ours, and this green is ours. So the only stuff left we've got to get, Alaska and Hawaii, this little green piece down here, all of this green and gold, and then this little blue bit up here. So let's talk about that little blue bit. So before, today, Oregon is just, you see the 49th parallel here, Oregon is just down here, and then we've got Washington up there. But all of this yellow is actually what was originally part of Oregon. All of this was Oregon territory. And it wasn't just the United States that wanted Oregon. Spain and Russia and Great Britain all said that Oregon actually belonged to them. After a while, Spain and Russia leave, and they don't try to claim it anymore. And we pretty much say, all right, we recognize the fact that this is controlled by Great Britain, all of this gold here. But we want, to get in on that. So in the 1800s, we signed a treaty with Great Britain allowing U.S. settlers to come